Welcome to another episode of Women in Focus. Today's Woman in Focus is an amazing person and you know her very well. You must have seen her on television for the past so many years, more than 25 years. Her name is Robin Gill and she is our Woman in Focus today. Robin, you're most welcome in our program.
Oh, you know, honestly, it's an honor to be here because I grew up with you. You were an institution in our house, so this is amazing to see you in person. And I used to see you at events, so it's nice to see you.
Lovely to have you here. I wanted to interview you earlier, but never found the right time because I always thought you were in Toronto because you did National, and National was always done from Toronto, and it came as a surprise to me when I found out you still live here in Vancouver. Get her to come to the program. So Robin, why did you become a broadcaster?
You know, I was always curious and interested, and I was especially interested in politics. When I was, 5, I would be dragged to campaign rallies with my family. My cousin would go door knocking for candidates,
right.
And he was my babysitter, so I would go with him. And I suddenly was so interested, and as a family, we read newspapers together. We watched the 6 o'clock news together. So it was always in the back of my head that I was going to do this, and I liked to write.
Right.
And so as a kid, I used to write stories all the time, and I would sit in the scenarios like this with my friends and pretend I was interviewing them, and then it just happened because I obviously went to school for it, and then I had to work at various jobs across the country to finally establish myself.
So as a broadcaster, different people have different interests. Like yours was politics, right? And political interest is a little dry. You can have a little bit of mischief in it as well, but it is not lifestyle. Well, would lifestyle had attracted you, or was it just politics?
No, actually, I call myself a generalist. So I was interested in anything that had people telling their stories.
Right.
So of course, yes, I loved the politics because that was hard news, and election campaigns loved those as well. But it was about telling people's stories, and that was the most important thing to me. And it could be a light story, it could be a heavy-duty story, it could be something in between. So it was just about making sure you told people's stories, and that was what my job was.
Now, I know that in broadcasting, you have to earn your due. You have to work really hard from the bottom to where you left in December after so many years. So what, was it 25 years, more than 20?
27 years
27
as a journalist.
years.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Those 27 years have got a beautiful history, with different major organizations that you've worked with. I mean, you worked with, what, all the big ones?
I basically worked for all the networks.
Yes.
At one point in my career. I started off in 1994 at BCTV here in Vancouver, Burnaby actually.
Yes.
I was an intern, and they said to me, listen, would you consider writing for us? So I would go to work at 5 in the morning and write for the noon show, and then I would go to classes in the afternoon afterwards.
Wow, and this was at UBC or BCIT?
I went to UBC first and did my degree in international relations, and then I went to BCIT for my broadcast journalism diploma. So I was going to BCIT afterwards.
Right.
And my instructors were so accommodating because they said, listen, this is an opportunity. It's the #1 station in BC.
Right.
You need to run with this. So that ended up parlaying into a job in Saskatchewan. I worked in a small market, Yorkton, Saskatchewan, population 15,000 people.
Wow.
And that's when I got my on-air experience. I was a reporter, I was an anchor, I had to shoot my own stories, I had to edit my own stories.
And why did you go to Saskatchewan, just like that?
Because I didn't have experience yet, and that was to get my experience.
Right.
And my producers at BCTV at the time said to me, listen, you need to get more experience. We can't put you on air. We can't put you on as a producer just yet. You need to get some experience. And I was producing as well. So I took the job and I went to Saskatchewan, and I was there for about 1.5 years. And then my father had a stroke, and I was very worried about being away. So I moved back to Vancouver and I freelanced at CBC for a year. And then a job came up in Calgary, and and I moved to Calgary because I thought Calgary was closer. It was a direct flight to Vancouver. I always made sure that if I moved away, I had to have a direct flight to Vancouver in case there was a family emergency,
Yeah.
or just to even see family on a regular
Right.
basis. So when I went to Calgary, I was the host of a morning show, and I did that for 2.5 years. I also reported every evening for the evening news. So I had
Wow.
a 12 to 14-hour day.
Holy macro.
And then you had to do appearances for the
Yes,
station and the
that's right.
company, if something, and I had to speak to students, and I had to speak on panels. So I had a really, really long day, but it was very fulfilling, and I felt I was doing what I had to do.
Right.
And then I got a call from Toronto Global News,
Yes.
and they asked if I'd be interested in coming to Toronto, but I didn't get the job on the first round.
No.
It was maybe another 6 months before they finally made an offer, and I
Right.
went to Toronto, and I was there for 8.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I loved it. It was like covering every major story. I was on election campaigns for the provincial government. I covered SARS. I covered the Air France crash
Yes.
at Pearson Airport. I can't even keep track. I covered the Pope's visit. I covered the Aga Khan's visit. Like, I covered all those things, so it was great.
As a broadcaster, you get to meet so many people that regular people don't get to meet. You talked about your dad. I want to talk a little bit about family and how you grew up here in Vancouver. But let's take a short commercial break and come back. Robin Gill is our Woman in Focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Women in Focus. Robin Gill is our Woman in Focus today. So Robin, you talked about, you were away and your dad had a stroke. So let's talk about family. Were you born here in Canada?
Yeah, I was born here in 1971. My parents had immigrated from Punjab in 1970 with my 4 siblings,
Wow.
3 sisters and a brother, and I was the one that came when they arrived.
So you
and
were the Canadian present.
I was the Canadian present. And it's funny, my mom says that of all my children, you are the one who's different because you were born here. And I said, but Mom,
Yeah.
the kids were young when they came. She said, no, there was something different about you. And she goes, I felt it from the day that you were born. You were different from all the other children. And,
Isn't that
I mean, we're all
interesting?
close. We're all,
Yes.
our siblings, my siblings and I are all really close. So, yeah, but they always treated me like I was the baby in the family.
Of
And I'm
course.
50 years old now, and I'm still the baby in the family. So don't worry about that.
That happens.
Yeah.
With siblings, that do happen. When you are the oldest, you look after the youngest.
My big sister
Yeah.
is still taking care of me. Don't you worry.
Isn't that
She
just
makes
beautiful?
me dinner every week and has dinner ready for me to pick up if I need to drop by and bring it home. So it's great. Yeah.
So talking about dinner, was dinner traditionally Indian, or was a little bit of Western cooking crept into Mom's?
It was everything.
Was it?
It was everything. Mom obviously made Indian food on
Yes.
a regular basis, but she also made, Caucasian food and Western food. I mean, I remember having shake and bake on Tuesdays.
So there were
That was in
certain
our-
days that you could have
certain
that.
days, and then sometimes on a Sunday she'd make a roast beef
Right.
or a roast chicken. So,
Right.
And my mom loves food, and she worked in the restaurant industry, so she picked it up from there and she brought it home. And so, yeah, it was a regular part of our lives. Also, Mom and Dad wanted to be immersed in Canadian culture, so it was about us bringing it to them as well. Like, we would bring it home. Mom, this is what we need to try. These are the foods we need to
Right.
try. This is what we had with our friends. I went to so-and-so's house. Mom, her mom made this. Can you
Right.
make it too? And she'd be like, yep, let's try it.
People
Yes.
at that time were so sweet to one another, and families meant everything. And I think you and I were talking, and you mentioned that COVID has brought all us back to the same family, reunification type of a deal, right?
And family values, if you think about it. When obviously when they had immigrated to Canada, they didn't know a lot of people, and it was, they knew our families that had already settled here, our aunts and uncles had come. And so then they became friends with other people who had immigrated around the same time, so they became our extended family.
Yes.
And we had family dinners constantly with the other families.
Right.
And they, friends, we used to call them auntie and uncle, obviously, and,
Right.
and their children were our cousins, even though they really weren't our cousins. So I feel that the pandemic has brought us back full circle to that.
Yeah.
Instead of going out, I mean, we didn't go out for dinner.
Right.
We maybe went out for dinner once or twice a year.
Right.
We had
and there
people
weren't
over.
that many restaurants that we could go out to have Indian food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we went for Chinese food for Mother's Day. That's what we did, you know, or Father's Day, and that was the big treat in our family.
Right.
And so I feel with the pandemic, we're doing those, you know, dinners again. We're having reunions with those people again. Mind you, we had to do a lot of it outside because of the pandemic and not risk. Like my mom
Right.
is 85. You know, we didn't want to risk
No.
having any health scares, right?
No. I don't think that parents get their children to sit down and say, okay, these are our values and we want you to follow these. It is children just pick up from parents' way of talking. Was it like that in your household, or you know, did your parents say, this is what we want you to do and this is what you can't do?
No, Mom and Dad let us do what we wanted to do. I will say with the older siblings, probably had more of the tradition imposed on them that you need to get married and you need to do this and you need to go into this career path.
But there was a Canadian kid who was different.
But the Canadian kid was different. And I mean, truth be told, we all did what we wanted to do at the end of the day. And you know, they were more concerned about what the community would say on what you were doing. And I remember when I told them I was going into journalism, my dad was like, I thought you were going to law school. I had all my pins hoped on you that you would go to law school, because it was in the back of my head as well. And you know, they always say, "Tadi magia," it's up to you, right? And so that's what they would say, it's up to you.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, and parents that get their children, they give them the direction, but then they let them do what they want to do and support them.
And my sisters, you know, married the men that they wanted to marry.
Yes.
It wasn't imposed on them.
Right.
And they had love marriages. They
Good.
you know, dated and had, you know, regular marriages like any Canadian would have had. Yeah.
Right. And were they big fat Indian weddings, or just?
Yes, they were.
And you had to do all that
Oh my gosh.
singing and dancing?
Oh my gosh. And
Yes.
I remember when you had to do the, you know, when the bride leaves her family's house and my eldest sister left, my dad was very sad and he was sobbing, and I'd never seen my father cry, so it was very odd. And I'm like, Dad, she's coming back tomorrow. Like, what's the big deal? And sure enough, she was over for dinner the next day.
But she's not anymore the same little girl.
No,
You
then
know?
that's what it was. It was watching your children grow up. Yeah.
I think that's what it is. You're from a Sikh family.
Yes.
Was religion important?
Dad was not religious. Mom was religious, but she never imposed it on
No.
us. We obviously went to Gurdwara for
Yes.
events of funerals, weddings, you know, kanpats. We went
Right.
for those things. But she never imposed it on us, and he didn't either. Our family values were about respect.
Yes.
It was about respect your family, respect your parents, respect your grandparents, and think about everything that they've done for you. And they didn't say, "Oh, look at what we've done for you." We picked it up.
That's
you know,
what it is.
We picked it up, and I was so, you know, as I got older, and I understood what my parents had to endure to leave a very comfortable life in India for not a very comfortable life in Canada,
Yep.
starting from scratch.
Yes.
Dad was in his 40s. It wasn't like he was a young man in his 20s
Right.
and able to, like, you know, pick up any job. And he went into the lumber industry and eventually became a developer, which was great for our family. But it was the hardship. Mom had to go and work, and she was taking English classes on her days off. And,
Wow.
you know, they were working, and back then, the labor laws were very different. They
Yes.
were working 6 days a week, and
Yes, and little
then-
pittance of pay.
and a pittance.
Yeah.
Mom was making $2 an hour. I remember
Oh,
that.
Wow, wow.
And I remember the day that they paid off the mortgage and how happy they were, because they were so stressed out about that mortgage and making sure we were all getting to university. They sent 5 children to university, by the way.
Wow.
And so those were the values that I picked up. The fact that you take care of each other, the fact that you respect each other, those were the family values we picked up. It wasn't about religion.
No. Isn't that interesting? I want to talk to you about the values. And that, of course, has shaped you. And in your own profession, there must have been stories that were very close to your heart. And then you fought to do those stories. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but let's take a short break. Right? Robin is our woman in focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Women in Focus. Robin Gill is our woman in focus today. We were talking about values and we're talking about what's shaped you. So as a broadcaster, you worked in major organizations, done different stories. There must be a particular field that always interests you and you want to do a story. Has that happened, or is it going to happen?
Oh no, I mean I did such a variety of stories over 27 years. It was always the stories I liked the best were the ones that were in front of the court system, and legal stories, but legal stories that were issues.
For example,
I did a story with this man from Hamilton, and he was the child of Holocaust survivors, and he was trying to prove that a piece of art had been taken away by the Nazis and was trying to fight it in court. And it was an important story to tell because you have to reflect and never forget about what happened during the Holocaust. And so it was a combination of history, legal, emotional,
yes,
and a people story. So it was about this man's plight, and so I really enjoyed doing that story. And he didn't win,
no,
but I mean there was a whole bunch of clauses. But stories like that I really enjoyed. This one woman, I did a story with her, and she had been the product of a sperm donor, and she wanted to seek the identity of whoever was her father, and she had to take it to court because there was privacy issues. And she wanted to take it to court because she said, I need to know what the medical history is of the sperm donor, the person who's my father, but he's really not my father because I do have, I have adoptive parents as well.
Right.
So that was an interesting story too. So those are things that are like, they're interesting, they're issues, they could affect anybody. And
they're relevant.
And they're relevant, and they could be ongoing, and that was the kind of stuff I liked doing.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Now that you have left broadcasting.
Yes.
Was that a decision that you made just like that one day, or?
Oh gosh, no.
Or took you a long time?
It had always been floated, over the years. Someone would come and say, oh, do you ever think about leaving broadcasting? And I would be like, no, I'm going to die doing this.
Yes.
I'm going to eventually make my way and become a news director and vice president of news and that kind of stuff. And then the pandemic hit, and it was really hard. And, we had half of our staff working from home and half working in the office. And the layers of complexity that developed as a result of it, it was more complicated, and it was exhausting. And I was working on days off because we had other projects, we had documentaries we were doing. Hi, would you like to do a podcast? Hi, would you like to do this? And then, so I was working 7 days a week at one point.
Well, and that's what I think many people had to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, you did at the beginning,
Yeah.
and then you had ebbs and flows. And then there was a time when, you could absolutely take your time off, but I was always on call regardless. And when the forest fires happened this summer, I was on vacation for 3 weeks, and I got a call 3 days into my vacation saying, can you be ready to go in case, this town explodes or that town has to be evacuated. So it was such a difficult decision, and I can tell you I was crying on my way to work and crying on my way home because an offer had landed in my lap. And the people I ended up leaving for, I work for TalkShop Media now, it's a public relations company, they did not pressure me. They took the time to counsel me through a career transition.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Before I took the job.
Yeah.
And they said, we want to make sure you're absolutely sure and certain about this. And I didn't tell anybody at work at Global, and it was hard, but somebody knew something was up because they said, you're not your usual self, you're distracted, and you're not laughing as much as you normally do in the office, because I was very quiet. Because I was ruminating, I was thinking about it.
You're also processing it.
It was a lot of processing, and I thought, oh my gosh, am I throwing away 27 years? And then I thought, I went through the library archives, and I went, oh my gosh, I've done so much. And is there anything that I'm missing? have I done it all? And the only thing that I felt I was missing, I wish I had been able to go to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And cover cover the war, cover the post-war, cover the new era, which is, you know, very alarming and very
Yes.
upsetting. And that was the only thing that I felt like I didn't do. And
Right.
it's just not safe to go to Afghanistan anyway, so.
Even now.
So even now, so in a sense, maybe that was the closure I needed, that I couldn't do that. And so, yeah, it was a really hard decision, but I did it because it was time to have a personal life. And I had turned 50, and I thought, you know, the next 10 years are the most important decade of, you know, doing something fun, doing something interesting, still being able to travel, and do the things that I didn't always get to do in the last little while.
And write
So,
a
yeah.
book.
And maybe write a book one day.
I think you
maybe
have
write
to
a screenplay. I don't know. Maybe write a screenplay about somebody making their way in journalism.
That would be very
and all the
nice.
crazy behind the scenes things that happened, right?
Yeah, behind the
Behind the
things many
scenes.
people don't know, right?
No.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things. That's beautiful. So currently you're working with a PR firm. So where do you see yourself? I mean, 10 years that you say is most important. What all do you want to cover in those 10 years?
Well, in the next 10 years, working in public relations, I want to help businesses grow. And I want to, the one thing that actually terrified me about the pandemic was the worry that the economy would collapse.
Yes.
And businesses were hurt. A lot of small businesses thrived, but a lot of small businesses did not, and medium,
Yeah.
et cetera. The big businesses, obviously, like the grocery stores,
Right.
they thrived. So for me, in the next 10 years, I want to help these businesses grow
Right.
by helping them with their public relations or their marketing strategies. And the one thing I will say about our company is that they're very cognizant of companies that have ethical standards, or
Yes.
you know, they meet a criteria. So I'm
Right.
doing a lot of corporate social responsibility right now with some
Wow.
companies, and I'm enjoying that.
You know, all the more power to you, Robin. I wish we'd interviewed you in between as well, but I'm glad that I got to meet you.
Well, one day maybe the reverse will happen, and we'll be interviewing you about
Hey.
your long career.
Let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin Gill has been our Woman in Focus today. Don't go away. We'll be right back.